Good morning. Welcome to Wake Forest University School of Divinity. My name is Corey Walker. I serve as Dean of the School of Divinity, and I am the Wake Forest Professor of the Humanities. And it is an honor to welcome you to the James and Marilyn Dunn Lecture and Symposium. This is a distinctive occasion that brings our theological community together in thoughtful conversation around the most vital questions of our moment. Thus, it's with deep gratitude and great expectation that I welcome you to this year's lecture and symposium. This will be a space where thought and faith, critique and compassion will converge with the gift of hope. Today, we will reflect together on the rich and rewarding theme, the gift of hope and the human condition. In a moment marked by profound uncertainty and deep yearning, we turn once more to that enduring gift of hope, not as affect or escape, but as sustaining force that empowers human beings to imagine, create, and live differently. Hope, in its most radical form, calls us to see the world as it is, and yet to believe and faithfully struggle for what it might become. The Dunn Lecture and Symposium stands firmly in the legacy of James and Marilyn Dunn, whose lives testified to the inseparable bond between faith and freedom, conscience and community. Their witness reminds us that theological education is an ongoing conversation, one that bridges academy and the world, intellect and spirit, word and deed. Today, as we gather as a community of scholars, students, faith leaders, and ministers, we participate in that sacred conversation. We seek wisdom that engages the complexities of the human condition and hope that sustains our shared journey toward justice, reconciliation, and compassion. To begin our time together, I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Professor Derek Hicks, who teaches and researches broadly in the areas of African American religion, religion in North America, race, the body, religion, and foodways, and the theory and method in the study of religion. Professor Hicks serves as co-chair of the Religion and Food Group at the American Academy of Religion and is author of the book, Reclaiming Spirit in the Black Faith Tradition. He is currently working on a second monograph entitled Feeding Flesh and Spirit, Religion, Food, and the Saga of Race in African America. Dr. Hicks' scholarship has been supported by fellowships and grants from the Ford Foundation, the Fund for Theological Education, the Louisville Institute, the Henry Luce Foundation, and the Wabash Center. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hicks as he begins our journey together, the gift of hope and the human condition.
Well, good morning. Come on, y'all. Some of you all have come a long way. Good morning. All right. I, in good Baptist fashion, was told I only have 5 minutes to get this thing going. And I want to take all that 5 minutes, so I won't be before you long. But I begin with words uttered in 1845, which were intended to offer clarity and for critical reflection as to the state of affairs regarding the religious soul of a nation professing itself to be Christian. And I quote, "What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to slave-holding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked." You need to read the whole speech. I don't have enough time to get into the nitty-gritty, but I will end the quote here. "They," meaning slave-holding Christians, "attend with pharisaical strictness to the outward forms of religion and at the same time neglect the weightier matters of law, judgment, mercy, and faith. End quote, Frederick Douglass, 1845. In like fashion, to Frederick Douglass's angst regarding many of the professing Christians of his day, our presenters enter that fray in conversation with our founding dean, Dr. Bill Leonard, to offer critical, reflective witness to the core of the Christian voice in this moment. Specifically, what can Baptists say both from within and without frameworks of what some consider evangelical Christianity, while others prefer the term Christian nationalism? Whatever the conveyance, why we are positioned to study Baptists today is inextricably tied to long-worn tensions within a nation whose very essence is formed by an experiment of democracy, a democracy yet unreconciled. It is the hope conveyed by the church, offering the most potent solvent for weary, questioning souls. And so we begin each chapter of Why Study Baptists, a Festschrift to Bill Leonard, represents not only potent scholarship to commemorate and honor the man, but also focuses on Bill's public commentary. Bill Leonard's commentary on the multifaceted state of Baptist life in America binds this complex conversation with amazing nuance, reminding us that the questions that inspire his proverbial quill to paper weren't much different than Douglass's 179 years before. Our illustrious panel includes, and I will very briefly introduce each one and have them come up right after I introduce them. We'll begin with Doug Weaver. Dr. Weaver is professor in the Department of Religion at Baylor University. He is the author of many books, including Baptists and the Holy Spirit, The Contested History with Holiness, Pentecostal, Charismatic Movements, Baylor University Press, 2019. Dr. Weaver, please join me. Next, we will have Linda Bridges, Director of Institutional Advancement, Professional and Community Leadership Experience at Salem College. Also, former president of Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond. Dr. Bridges, please join us. Thank you. President Pamela Durso was appointed as the 11th president at Central Seminary in Overland Park, Kansas, by the Board of Directors in February of 2020. She is the author of and editor of 10 books, including The Story of Baptists in the United States and The Power of Women, The Life and Writings of Sarah Moore Grimke. Please join us. Melissa Rogers is the Distinguished Scholar in Residence in Faith, Law, and Public Policy at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. She serves as a non-resident senior fellow in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institute. Rogers is author of Faith in American Public Life, Baylor University Press, 2019. Please join us on stage. I will introduce Bill now, but he will not join us just yet. Bill Leonard is the founding dean and professor of divinity emeritus here at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. Dr. Leonard's research focuses, as we know, on church history, with particular attention to American religion, Baptist studies, and Appalachian religion. He is the author and editor of some 25 books, including Christianity in Appalachia, 1999, and Baptist Ways, of course, A History in 2003, among so many others. He will be joining us shortly. Can we give our esteemed panelists a round of applause as we begin this conversation? So you all have your marching orders from Dean Walker, so what we will begin with is about a 10-minute reflection on your contribution to this conversation, and then we'll open the floor up with some conversation amongst ourselves before we bring Dr. Leonard up. So let's start with you, Dr. Weaver.
First, thank you for letting me be with you today. I think it's a social commentary that the worst dressed person in this room is the only one with a tie. So.
There was a time.
The idea of a book to honor Bill Leonard, here's the book, was actually Keith Harper's, who unfortunately died this past year. Harper was a senior professor of Baptist studies at the nearby Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. I need you to let that sink in for a moment. He was at a Southern Baptist seminary. I have contact with maybe one or two Southern Baptist academics in my life, that's all. None of us up here are very popular with any of them. But Keith, out of the blue, would contact Bill Leonard and me with emails asking us how to interpret events in the Baptist tradition, past, present, and future. It astounded me at first. Why would this Southern Baptist, so conservative theologically that he certainly was going to stay Southern Baptist, why would he want to hang around with historians of progressive Baptist ilk? But by the way, as we made the reality of this book come together, I was the one that chose most of the contributors, mainly because I knew Bill's friends and Keith did not. In fact, I repeatedly asked Keith Harper, do you think you can do this book? Are you going to get in trouble for being associated with all of us up here? He said, well, I had to ask my wife, and she said it might be okay. So I think it's only fair to start by quoting Keith Harper for a moment. When he asked, why on earth would anyone want to study Baptist? His answer was that it was a compelling, fascinating story. And then he leaned toward Bill Leonard and said, Bill Leonard is one of the best to tell a compelling Baptist story. He is a master at the craft. Keith, as we all did, highlighted Bill's book, Baptist Ways, as the way to describe Baptist identity. But Keith's favorite book of Bill's was actually his 1990, God's Last and Only Hope, the Fragmentation of the SBC. Keith believed its description of a creation and erosion of something called the Grand Compromise was the key to understanding conflict in the 20th century. That compromise was the practice of agreeing to disagree on theology and practice in order to do missions together. This is Keith's conclusion. As Baptists have always styled themselves as a missionary people, but those who attacked the Grand Compromise as missionary consensus were seemingly oblivious to the fact that once the consensus was undermined, they could never return to it. The last sentence coming from a Southern Baptist still today is astounding because he admitted that Bill Leonard's conclusion about Baptist conflict was correct, and that conclusion was that conflict was about raw power and not mainly about theology. He would tell Bill and me that in private. I would hope everybody here would know that I am now in my 23rd year at Baylor University. I'm now in my 40th year in academia. You can count the years if you'd like. But I was one of Bill Leonard's PhD students. Rob Nash and I think, are the only two that are not yet playing shuffleboard. I have done in my own career a good bit of work on conscience in Baptist life as a key, what I call DNA marker. The reason for that is the influence of Bill Leonard. I've also written some on Baptist ecclesiology, and E.Y. Mullins, no doubt again influenced by Bill Leonard's shadow on the importance of the believer's church in the Baptist story. Over the last couple of decades, as Derek has mentioned, I've returned to the study of Baptist and Pentecostals and how they interact. Look, it's not a bad gig. I'm one of the few people in the whole world that think that the topic is worth studying. But I started that study in Louisville, Kentucky, when Bill Leonard, my teacher, said I could cross the river into Jeffersonville, Indiana, visit the quaint Branham Tabernacle, and write on an international faith healer named William Marion Branham. Bill bloodied my dissertation and said, this thing has too many nutty stories in it, you just got to delete them. And I did, but I ended up telling them later anyways. Touché for the nuttiness of American evangelicalism. Writing on Baptists and the Holy Spirit has been a lot of fun for this non-charismatic. I can raise one hand. It's hard to do two. But the chapter in the book is on the Shantung revival. And if you have read it or do, I've now done 4 pieces as a follow-up to the study on baptism and the Holy Spirit on what is called the most influential missions revival in Baptist history. Some people have said that. Why study Baptist? Keith Harper wanted to honor Bill because in doing so, I have found that self-professed Spirit-led Baptists include women preaching and prophesying, even a few speaking in tongues and getting slain in the Spirit. I've found Baptist women tell the head of the Farm Mission Board of the SBC that they can speak and must speak of what they have seen and heard, and they can't be silent. I have found Baptist men and women affirm experience is at the core of their Baptist identity, and I have become convinced that that is the core of Baptist identity. We are experiential people. The Spirit-led Baptist reminds us that Bill's phrase, Baptist ways, is more expansive than most Baptists want to admit or that we feel comfortable with. Bill used to use a phrase in class that I actually used last week, charismatic light, to speak about certain Baptist and charismatic practices, Pentecostal practices. The only thing that I would ask Bill about is that it's probably a little heavier than light. Throughout my career, I think it's fair to say that Bill Leonard taught me, and then I tried to teach students, that dissent and conscience are also at the heart of Baptist identity. Being Baptist takes courage given the stupidity that also surrounds and engulfs the Baptist story. The message of freedom has been lived poorly more often than not, especially in relationships between races and genders. But fighting for conscience is something that we have done and you will continue to do if Baptist DNA is yours. That is Bill Leonard's legacy. I am proud of the people we had to contribute to the book. Randall Ballmer is a busy Dartmouth historian, but he wanted to write for Bill Leonard, and he wrote what historians might expect. Ballmer says that the one good thing about Baptist history is the separation of church and state and religious liberty for all. We see that embodied here with Melissa Rogers. Rob Nash, the other Leonard student, not yet in a rocking chair, has a great article on missions methodology, and it's not your grandma's traditional white missions recipe. It echoes his dissertation with Bill, where he uncovered a racial ideology that undergirded 19th century white Baptist missionary life. Fellow panelists Pam Durso and Linda Bridges write about 2 topics in the book that highlight the importance of things in Bill's life, and that's women in ministry and the study of religion in Appalachia. We have 3 other articles in the book that deal with white Baptists and how they deal with their original sin of racism. And last, and certainly not least, we have a chapter by Wake's Dean, Dr. Corey Walker, who writes on MLK Jr. and black Christology and black ecclesiology. He kindly quotes Bill in his reflections. Why? Because you will not go long if you're listening to hear how Bill Leonard loves the Believers Church and he loves to preach to that church. When I look back on my training, and by the way, I haven't retired yet, so don't tell my colleagues I'm not yet. I'm getting close, but not yet. I want to tell you that I studied with 3 people, Glenn Henson, Buddy Sheridan, Bill Leonard, and Leonard was my dissertation mentor. All three became very close friends. By the way, Henson came here and didn't survive, but anyways, I had a Hall of Fame. I had a Hall of Fame in the Baptist tradition, and that's why I'm happy to have my name on this book. Why study Baptist? Baptist history is a mess, but it also has some highlights. I know what good Baptist DNA is. It's conscience, dissent as faithfulness, experience as it interacts with word and spirit. You are looking at it in this room, and it's right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda, please.
I've known Bill Leonard for about 50 years. How can that be? I'm only 32. So it's a conundrum. But in that 50 years, I can recall when I first met him. He may not remember me. I was a graduate student at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in 1975, and we were in the post office, and you were coming in with, as always, a group of people around you, and there was Candace, and there was little baby Stephanie in Candace's arms. And it was from that beginning I began to notice you. That was not the final notice of him, because in those years, as I was a graduate student with first a Master of Religious Education, because they wouldn't allow women to study divinities at that particular time in 1975, so I studied religious education. But I would see him out of the corner of my eye from different places. I would then go to Taiwan and see the second generation Shandong revival people and know those people in your chapter personally, including Bertha. So I would see the results of Bill Leonard, and then when I was doing PhD work with Alan Culpepper, I would see you church history guys. I must describe this in ways that a non-scientist can. To see Bill Leonard walking across the Josephus Bowl at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in the late 70s was like seeing an amoeba under a microscope with a nucleus barely visible, but the particles in the cell all around. That would mean that Brother Bill and his students always stayed together in this moving cellular frame. And you would think, what are they doing? They're laughing, they're talking, but everybody's in somewhat step, but they're always walking across Josephus Bowl to the cafeteria, and they're talking and laughing. And then you'd see in the middle, when you barely got a view, there was a short person in the middle, and that was Bill. And all the energy was going to that nucleus. And it was a cell, like an amoeba cell, that would walk across the campus. There are a lot of other stories about his teaching and opportunities of lots of laughter, but they're not so public-oriented. I will let him tell those stories about how he prepared lectures from afar and then sent them back to Norton 114 to be digitized and spoken to. That will not be my story to tell. That will be your story to tell. But what I remember most was there was always people around him. In many ways, these boys, if you'll excuse the pejorative maybe word, were always circling him. Yes, he was a young professor that had finished BU, and he was kind of the star of the show in church history. But there was always people engaging in conversation with him. And you could see them held together by this by this Texan that had come through Boston and now was giving his life to Louisville. Whoa. They were his students. He was an ironic person. Now, let me explain that a little bit. He is deliberately contrary to what one expects, and some of those expectations become amusing. I told him that I felt like this might be a roast, but I'm going to try to take the striking of the editor of this beautiful Festschrift and say it's really an honorific moment. It's not just to roast him, but here he was coming to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in the 70s with a newly minted PhD from Boston University, and you would expect there would to be the first wave of distant learning. Not distance learning, distant learning. The august professor stands in the pulpit lectern, and the students laboriously take notes in their silence until after the lecture is finished. The first iteration of distant learning. But the irony was that was not Bill Leonard. There was not much distance from the teaching lectern and those students that were sitting in his class. In fact, it was such a vicarious, incarnational kind of method of his teaching that they became a part of him and he became a part of them and all those stories that he was telling about through time. A scholar of history, yes, expecting that to be. We all know the kind of depth and breadth of a scholar of church history. Expect the recitals of events, historical timelines, precision of explanations, and if you can, do cause and effect study, pretty hard to do. But he was a church historian with a cultural anthropological kind of leaning, meaning this wasn't just a recital of events and stories, but it was people that came to life in those moments of his lectures. Ironic, a professor of church history, but made it incarnational, made it about people, not just timelines and data. A scholar, a professor, we expect it, a published author. But the irony of it, he also became a pretty good, successful administrator. You know, and you came here from the classroom, from administrative duties light, if I might say, no aplomb to Samford, but you came here and you took on the task of establishing this seminary, which is still alive and thriving, thanks to Corey and other people that have followed you. But you started it, I saw you across the way, I was watching, and soon in my vision came another cellular amoeba. This time it was the law dean. This time it was people that were in the business school. It was people, administrators that he collected, like he'd collected those PhD boys in church history. And now he had, can I use the word infiltrate? Maybe, if I lessen the political cadence of that. But he had enamored a community whereby those folks that were not in the div school thought he was their best friend. Mm-hmm. That's something, Bill. That is really something. Ironic, but something. A Baptist through and through. I mean, you can't scratch. And it's in some ways, the depth of it is Texas Baptist, and you go down and it is pure Pentecostal because it comes from Camp Myrtle in Myrtle, Mississippi. It comes from that level of whatever that was called, holiness or something that we could all connect into. But you came through various channels of that. And you published books to show it. You've been very revelatory with your theological journey. And you have a genetic disposition to all the tenets of the Baptist faith and message with modifications, with amendments. Sola scriptura, sure, but sola dissenter. Sola all people, sola white people, sola black people, sola women, sola men, sola racial justice, sola the cosmos. And what this chapter helped me to understand, sola Appalachian people. because all of those were just small areas of a big picture. But when Bill got a hold of them, it was comprehensive and full. So the greatest irony of all for me is that he loved my people. He was from Texas. How could he know about my people? He loved my people. He would ask me in days when we were in Louisville together, Linda, will you come and help me lead this course? Because he began this foray into Appalachian religion, and he can tell you all about that, or you can read all about that in his book. But I'd say, no. In my heart, it was another word before no, but I would say no. I mean, I worked hard to get out of there. Let me just say, I worked hard. I went to Beijing, I went to Taipei, I went to Louisville, I went to Winston-Salem. I worked hard to get out of those hills. And so Bill said, will you come and help me teach that course? I said, no. I've worked hard. In fact, I am praying for any preacher that preaches with a manuscript, because that preacher hasn't met Jesus. I am praying for a deacon that stands up and reads his prayer before the offertory because he's not spiritual. That was the mountain girl coming to Raleigh to go to school for the first time. I am trying to get out of that. I'm going to Louisville, Kentucky, and learning about liturgy and the liturgical calendar and all of this. So I'm thinking, wow, he wants me to go back and take students to go teach them that? No, I'm out of there. We were here at Wake Forest together. I was across the way in the dean's office. He was here, and he was still teaching that course. And he said, will you help me? And something in me said, okay, maybe now's the time. And so I went, I think it was 2008, 7, and those were a wonderful opportunity for me personally, because I too was in your big amoeba group, because that enabled me to go back and reclaim that tradition and then teach in it and write in it and honor it. And in the summer of 2026, there will be a book about 312 pages that describe my relationship to those mountains. So I was able to come back home thanks to you. And in the words of T.S. Eliot, who describes it for at least me, and described it for me as I taught that course, and then Bill invited my father to come in and be one of the instructors. You know, just a mountain preacher, man. Come and teach these seminary students, 23 of them, some from Yale, some from Emory, some from BTSR, lots of students. And he taught that course, and we had such a good time together. And then he kept writing about Preacher Harold, Brother Harold, and all the things that he's written about. But for me, it was a chance to go home again. How many of us can do that? How many of us can be the light for someone to help them find home? In the words of T.S. Eliot, I write, because the irony now has been fully explained, we shall not cease from our exploration. And at the end of all of our exploring is to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. Thank you for guiding me home, Brother Bill. It's been a wonderful journey. God bless you, Brother Bill Leonard.
President Durso.
Yes. Well, I have not had the privilege of studying in a classroom with Bill Leonard, nor working alongside him, and I feel like a new convert to the Bill Leonard amoeba. But I will say this, if there is a Bill Leonard fan club, and I'm sure there is, I would like to be president of that. I have been long an admirer and inspired by the work that you have done, your scholarship, your preaching, your lecturing, but mostly your kindness and generosity have impacted my life, and I am so grateful for you, Bill. So, for over 40 years, I have been drawn to the study of history, and I'm fairly certain it was the love of a good story that drew me in. As a child, I begged my grandmother to tell me about coming with her family from Oklahoma to West Texas in a covered wagon. And I pestered my granddad to tell me stories about his childhood. And as a historian, I still love a good story, and I especially love the faith stories of Baptists. But now, as an older historian, what I value even more is the perspective that history provides. Looking back at history, we can identify connections, reoccurring themes and trends, patterns that yield insight for understanding the present, and even offering hope for the future. History allows us to see more than just what has happened. It can shape how we understand contemporary struggles, and the ones that are important to me are in inclusion, authority, and voice. And so for several decades, I have given much time to recovering the voices of Baptist women preachers. And of course, my research has reviewed patterns of gender exclusion and silencing. Gender exclusion and silencing that is still evident in 2025. So consider some of the recent events in the last 3 weeks. On October 27, Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes, who claimed, and I quote, "It's the women. The men are extremely conservative, the women are extremely liberal." And then he said, "Of course I think all women naturally want a strong man. None of them want to work either." Carlson echoed these sentiments and said, "I don't know a single happily married woman who's liberal, not one. Every happily married woman is non-liberal. And your wife," he said, "your wife ultimately is subordinate to you. She's your helpmate, and the authority rests with men." October 27th. Media commentators noted that this segment framed women as the problem while reinforcing patriarchal authority, a contemporary example of gendered silencing. Similarly, on November 6th, the New York Times published an opinion column originally titled, "Did Women Ruin the Workplace?" They retitled it shortly thereafter, "Did Liberal Feminism Ruin the Workplace?" The article argued that changes in the workplace culture tied to feminism and evolving gender roles had disrupted traditional work environments, framing women's agency as a challenge to established systems. So in 2025, these cultural commentators cast women's autonomy and leadership as a problem, echoing centuries-long patterns of gendered silencing that Baptist women have historically navigated. So recovering the stories of Baptist preaching women from the 17th century England to colonial America and beyond illuminates the resilience and provides a corrective lens to understanding and challenging contemporary exclusions. Baptist women's voices have always mattered, and their inclusion is essential to the life of the church and to society. For 400 years and more, Baptist women have preached, claiming their voices in the streets, in their homes, and in churches, even when denominational structures and societal norms tried to silence them. Yet their persistent leadership is often overlooked, leaving history incomplete and framing contemporary debates over women's authority as if women's voices was a new distraction. So as I noted in the article I wrote in Why Study Baptist, Baptist theology and polity have long emphasized the priesthood of all believers and congregational autonomy. And Baptists have taught equality in salvation, and many churches welcomed women to testify publicly or privately about their conversion experiences. Yet for most of history, women have largely been excluded from preaching, their voices carefully controlled or silenced. And yet, Baptist women found a way to preach. They preached on the street corners, in homes, in lecture halls, behind pulpits. Some of them hesitated to call themselves preachers, and they denied that their public addresses even counted as preaching. And yet the content of their message, their sermonic insight and recognition by their communities demonstrate that women's preaching since the earliest days has been a part of the Baptist movement. Until roughly 30 years ago, there was little information about Baptist women preachers available, and for women of color, the historic record is even more scarce. So what we know has been recovered from state and local histories, associational minutes, letters, diaries, and autobiographies. More recently, published collections of sermons and digital technologies have made women's voices more accessible. And while I do not have time to share all the fascinating stories that I have uncovered over the last 30 years, I will highlight just a few in the 17th to 19th centuries. In the early 17th century, in England, British Baptist women were active in the church, outnumbering the men most often. And despite opposition, some of them preached publicly. A 1641 document lists 6 women who preached across England in the 1630s, and they claim they took up preaching because, and this is a quote, there was a deficiency of good men, wherefore it was but fit that virtuous women should supply their place. In the mid-1640s, Mrs. Attaway, a lace maker and a member of a General Baptist congregation in London, began holding sessions on Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock. Her initial sessions were for women, but because of her popularity and her good preaching and teaching, a huge crowd of people began to come, including men. And Thomas Edwards, a Presbyterian minister and a vehement opponent of Baptists, labeled Mrs. Attaway the mistress of all she-preachers on Coleman Street. By the 18th century, some Baptist women in colonial America were also preaching, especially separate Baptist women. They were known for their effectiveness as exhorters and as preachers. And the best known of those is Martha Stearns Marshall, who preached and prayed alongside her brother Shubal Stearns and her husband Daniel Marshall, who were both pastors. Martha's preaching scandalized some congregations, but she was noted for her zeal and eloquence. And her preaching, and I quote, was added greatly to the interest of meetings conducted by her husband. I think this means she was a better preacher than Daniel, but that's just me. In the 1810, Baptist historian Robert Semple wrote of Martha's contributions to Baptist work. He wrote this: Mr. Marshall has the rare felicity of finding in this lady a Priscilla, a helper in the gospel. In fact, it should not be concealed that his extraordinary success in ministry is ascribable in no small degree to Mrs. Marshall's unwearied and zealous cooperation. Without the shadow of an usurped authority over the other sex, Mrs. Marshall, being a good lady of good sense, singular piety, and surprising elocution, has in countless instances melted a whole concourse into tears by her prayers and exhortations. One black woman whose voice was preserved was Maria W. Stewart. Some scholars identify her as the first American black woman to write a political manifesto. Other scholars, including Carolyn Richmond, believe that Maria was a preacher, and in fact, her writing and later public addresses were sermons. And many of her writings certainly had the content and cadence of sermons. In 1832 and 1833, Maria was one of the first women to speak in public. And like other women, she dared to break gender norms, and she caused quite a scandal. In an address delivered on February 27, 1833, Maria answered the criticisms of her public speaking and her willingness to address audience comprised of both men and women with these words: "What if I am a woman? Is it not the God of ancient times who is still the God of modern days? Did God not raise up Deborah to be mother and judge of Israel? Did not Queen Esther save the lives of the Jews, and Mary Magdalene first declare the resurrection of Christ from the dead? The religious spirit which has animated women in all ages showed itself. Why cannot a religious spirit animate us now?" So across the centuries, Baptist women have continued to find ways to preach, despite skepticism and structural barriers. From the 1630s on, women have claimed their voices in streets, in homes, in churches, proving that when opportunities were restricted, gifted Baptist women created them. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you.
Lisa.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here and thank Dean Walker and founding Dean Leonard and co-panelists. It's just such a delight to hear your comments, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'd like to say a few words about Bill as the founding dean of Wake Forest University Divinity School to set the stage for the rest of our discussion. First, a little bit of background about where I'm coming from. For more than 30 years, I've worked as an attorney in Washington, D.C. On the boundaries between church and state, religious freedom and church-state separation, making sure that we respect those boundaries and they will respect religious freedom for everyone in equal measure, as dictated by the First Amendment of our Constitution, other parts of the Constitution, and laws and policies. And as a young attorney, I worked at the Baptist Joint Committee with James Dunn and with Brent Walker, who were at the time executive director and general counsel of the BJC, and they were great friends of Bill's too. And as you know, when James retired from work in DC, Bill asked him to come teach here at Wake Divinity, including teaching about law and public policy to divinity school students. Now, James, as you know, was a towering figure in the field. He was, as Bill has said, a genius in cutting through complexity with edgy simplicity. Can't say it better than that. Now, when Bill invited James to come to Wake Forest as it was getting started, I was really struck by that decision at the time. And that was in part because many other divinity schools apparently thought that while it made sense to teach about law and public policy in a law school, it didn't make much sense to talk about law and public policy in a divinity school. Well, Bill had a different vision. First, he knew that it was imperative that divinity school students understand the theological basis for religious liberty and church-state separation. These are not just legal principles, they are theological principles. And Bill got that, and he knew that students needed to understand that. For example, he wanted students to know why Pastor John Leland said that the fondness of magistrates to foster Christianity has done it more harm than all the persecutions ever did. They had to understand that, and Div School was the right place to do it. Again, church-state matters are theological issues that have to be understood that way. And he knew that James could be this amazing teacher for students of this concept. Also, Bill wanted divinity school students who would be serving as ministers in churches, for example, to learn about all the forces that would be impacting them. There were forces within the church community, of course, but there were also going to be a lot of forces outside the church community that were going to be bearing on the church community. And you would be sending a lamb to the slaughter without them understanding that in a real practical way, not just a theoretical way, also a practical way. And because Bill has such a lifelong experience with these issues, not just academically, but in the church itself, in communities, he knew that ministers had to understand the tensions between religion and the state in order to productively deal with government, not be bamboozled by it. It's a technical term. So, for example, he wanted to make sure that students thought about these questions. What should ministers do when a candidate shows up at church and wants to speak to the congregation? Often it just so happens the Sunday before an election. What kinds of non-discrimination laws apply to church employment decisions, whether it's the associate pastor or the church secretary? What should a pastor do when he or she has the feeling that they're getting the runaround from the local zoning board, and yet the businesses nearby don't seem to have any problem expanding their property and their buildings? What should a minister do when the governor or a mayor says, hey, I want to meet with you? What should they do? What should they think about and whether to take that meeting? And then if they decide to take it, what should they do to make good use of that time for the community and for the people that they care about? Also, Bill knew that divinity school students, some of them would become chaplains, including governmental settings, and they would benefit a great deal from these courses and discussions. And it won't surprise you to know that Bill was savvy enough, even though we take this for granted now, that some divinity school students would actually want to intentionally combine the worlds of faith, law, and public policy as a profession. So they might work for a faith-based organization that provides social services or advocates on social policy or broad policies beyond social policy, and even by working for a governor or a legislature, tending to that very tricky intersection of church and state that governors and legislators and other people in public service, they need to understand religion, and they need to understand religious freedom as not just some legal concept and something in a dusty book, but something that's lived out every day in communities across our country. And I thought at the time how far-sighted it was of Bill to understand that these concepts should be taught in the divinity school, because then students will have time to really stew on them and work through them in a community before they run headlong into them in public life. Because even when you've given careful thought to these issues in advance, these issues can be tricky, tricky, tricky. If you don't have a running start, you are almost certain to fall into the pit. And that's not where you want to be. So best to get that good running start at divinity school with people all around you who can help, including the incredibly talented, endlessly fun, and often so tenderhearted James Dunn. Well, a short time later, Bill invited me to come to the divinity school as well. And now it occurred to me at the time, he already had James Dunn, who was a legend. Why did he need me? Well, what I learned was that Bill was interested in the long term. He didn't just want one generation of students to think about these issues. He wanted to bake this thing into the identity of Wake Forest University School of Divinity. So I joined James and Bill in teaching divinity school students about religious freedom and church-state separation and other important legal and public policy matters. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. Thank you, Bill. And Bill recruited many other faculty members, including our esteemed moderator and others who know about these things and can bring their experience to the classroom and help students understand these important issues better. And so for me, I just want to say that that began a long and treasured relationship with Wake that continues today. And as I've cycled in and out of government in more recent years, Wake has let me go and then also welcomed me back. And Bill has helped ensure that his successors would continue this vision. And as you know, Corey is as committed to it as Bill is, and finding new ways to expand and deepen that foundation. So this is one of the many innovations that Bill launched here at Wake Forest, and it's embedded in this wonderful book, and thank you, Doug, for editing. I know what a labor of love that was for you. So it's one of the many innovations, and it's a way that that Bill has helped us ensure that Baptist distinctives, including religious liberty and church-state separation, are understood by generations of ministers, and that could not be more important, especially today. So thank you, Bill, for your vision and for bringing it to life here at Wake Divinity. Thank you for including me in that vision. And thank you, Corey, for doing the same and for building on that great foundation. As I said, it's been a blessing for me, but much more importantly, it's a blessing to our nation and our world, and a good example to follow. May this pioneering vision continue to grow and expand here at our beloved Wake Divinity and far beyond. Thank you.
This is the moment I get to take a bit of liberty and engage our panelists in a short conversation before we bring Bill up, because there were several things that struck me that I want to engage you on and just have you just quickly reflect, and we can end up talking with each other briefly in conversation. I'm going to start where we ended, because I think what you're articulating, these challenges within politics, the state, government, and law, especially around the separation of church and state, it makes me think of President Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, with malice to none and charity to all, but really as a tactic to bring the country back together, utilizing religious language, but articulating it, as it were, to the state and to the populace. Frederick Douglass was quoted as saying that his second inaugural address sounded more like a sermon rather than a presidential address, but there was a tactic behind that. So how do we think about that in this day and age, where we are polarized beyond measure, especially as it relates to religious ideation and language, where there is a convergence of at least thinking about the state and religion, thinking about government and religion. But how do we parse that in a more healthy way in 2025?
Great question. One of the things I think it makes me think about right away is preaching, teaching, sharing this vision that Bill Leonard and James Dunn and Corey Walker and everyone on this panel has really lived out in their lives, but frankly hasn't been heard very much. And you get a kind of rope-a-dope thing where, church-state separation is this thing that's hostile to religion. And, if you can get to those people and explain, church-state separation is the thing that protects religion's independence. And without independence, religion loses its vitality and its power. So, I think part of it is just getting that message out as powerfully as we can to people, to disabuse them of careless, misconceptions about what religious liberty is. And understanding, for example, that if we don't have religious liberty for everyone, we don't have it for anyone. And that under our Constitution, there are no second-class faiths, period. If we don't live up to that, then we don't have the nation that we've always aspired to be. And to say it with love and generosity, and as Bill is such a great example, to build bridges with people. I always think about how, they talk today about some politicians don't do well because they seem not to like the people they're talking to often. And that has not ever been Bill's problem. And he is, when he's been going to Appalachia or anywhere, and there could be people that might be on very different points of the political spectrum, of the theological spectrum, but Bill has always been great at just embodying a sense of love and welcome and curiosity about your life, what that's like. Tell me about that. I want to understand that better. So I just think those are some of the ingredients that we need to double down on in a period of, as you say, great fracture in our national public life and alienation from one another. Hopefully, by doing that, we can really make progress and get us out of a very distressing situation we're in today.
Okay, well, Brother Doug, that brings me to my question for you then. Melissa talked about Bill saying it with love and generosity, and I'm thinking about some conversations I've had, some will know this name, with Danny Aiken, who is the president of the Baptist Seminary on our former campus in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And we, as you might imagine, have different perspectives. But for some reason, evangelicals, they invite me in long enough to see how much Dallas Theological Seminary is still in me, and then I don't get invited back. So Doug, how might we square this idea that you articulate as Baptist identity being inextricably tied to experience, right? And experiential people. How do we square that in these kind of conservative, non-conservative debates, or even debates about errancy and all those, and what is biblical in this climate that we're in now?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to start with Ed Galsted, who was a historian of American Baptists, that basically said anytime Baptists have thrived, it's been because of experience. Bill Hull was a colleague, an older colleague of Bill Leonard's, that actually wrote about this well. But in terms of experience and doctrine in Southern Baptists, my view is that they are, by trying to hide behind certain doctrines for security, they really they're reacting to experience. So it's experience to me simply still has to be centered. It's not by itself, but it's experience of reacting against Pentecostals, it's experience of reacting against Bill Leonard and the vibrant faith he has. So I'm not saying doctrine's not there, Derek, but I still think that you cannot explain the vitality of the Baptist story without understanding that experience, either reacting to it, affirming it, modifying it. Nice way of saying sola scriptura. Sometimes experience might be formed by how you read the Bible, but oftentimes experience is really the beginning point. So I might be heretical to a conservative to say that you start with the Word and then you read your experience in light of that. I just think if you watch Baptist life, you start with experience. And one of the things that he made popular in his own career, but not in his later books, but often in some of Bill's earliest works, one of his best articles ever was Getting Saved in America. You remember that one? But he talked so much about conversion and the different ways of being converted. And you can't really talk about Baptist life without talking about that fundamental experience. What I think that I hope I have done with that is that after they've gotten converted and they say once saved, always saved, and it's still, and these are white Baptists, but they still say that's enough, but it's never been enough. They're always asking for more. They're always seeking for more. And by the way, some of the most famous African-American Christians in the history books, the founder of the Church of God in Christ, as you know, C.H. Mason, the founder, who he split with, Charles Jones, they were Holiness Baptists out of Mississippi and Arkansas. And I simply think those are also illustrations that while doctrine is certainly important, that you simply can't explain the story without the core of experience.
So Linda, I'm going to come to you now, and I'm thinking about, thank you, Doug, for reminding me of being a Baptist-costal.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of Baptist-costals out there.
Kenneth Omer and
One
Bishop
hand or two.
Morton and all those folks who I kind of was nurtured in my 20s. Linda, you brought us to the significance of Bill's style and kind of natural nature as it relates to collaboration. And I want to extend that to even fellowship, right? With students, and I would add with colleagues, but in this case, you were speaking about students, which formed not only their minds, but their whole selves, right? Their bodies, their spirits, their souls, over and against the kind of distance climate of, you talked about the lectern and the one who would speak from the lectern, the professor. But now we're in a legitimate distance learning climate today where we don't see the nature of community in the same way. What are our possibilities in community today and beyond?
I'm still thinking about legal education. I'm still thinking about rationality and spirituality of the tradition. So the thing that's connecting all of this as I think about all of this is that theology is anthropology, is that our faith is people, and people, right? We can't get beyond that. We'll build ecclesiastical structures. We'll build legal structures, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg will say those structures were not right, and they need to be reformed and reframed. We'll build ecclesiastical structures, and we'll say those structures didn't make it. 1 million more in 54 just was not the way to lead one to an experiential faith. It was to organize a political structure which had religious overtones, but it was a strict political conventional structure. I'm not saying down with anything that has order, not now, this minute, or not today maybe, but, and I do take my dissenting heritage with integrity and with seriousness. So I'm not opposed to saying down with the structures, but I do think that the glue, as I tried to explain this unique attribute of Bill Leonard, and you've said it, we're all saying it, is sola people. And whatever that means, whether that means I go and have a cup of coffee with Danny Aiken, which he would probably say, no, thank you, Linda, you right? Or, I go and I sit through whatever it means to acquiesce my own ego, my own self, into moving in that space and trying to understand the other with significance and validity and find common ground. Period. People. Sola people.
President Durso, I'm struck by what you offered us, and as we consider the issue of gendered silencing, I couldn't help but think of one work that I don't hear people talk about a lot, but I've referred to quite a bit, and that is Anne Boleyn's Lift High the Cross, where white supremacy and the Christian right converged. It's written in 2002, a bit dated now, but a lot of the arguments around focus on the family and some other things she did in that work still hold. I'm also thinking, well, let me say one more thing about the book. What she really hinges on is the way the Christian right tends to retell our historical narrative, right? Especially as it relates, of course, to race, but also as it relates to gender.
Right.
I can't help but also think about towering Baptist women like Nannie Helen Burroughs, who, as part of the auxiliary of the National Baptist Convention, and through all these sisters, all black women articulating values of the 3 Bs, really constructed a tactic for black folks to arise out of slavery and through Jim Crow, to see themselves as fully human through their faith, right? So I'm thinking about all of this work from women, and yet the silencing is simultaneously there. So I don't know, you have the toughest question to answer. What is our way forward here?
Well, I think the creativity of women of the past and the resilience and the determination is a good way forward for us, seeing what they managed to achieve in times when they were not heard and included. As women and people of color in 2025, I think continuing to be resilient, to find creative ways to move forward is part of our DNA, really, as Baptists too, and to be dissenters. And I think that's many of the women that I have uncovered in Baptist history were, in their own way, dissenters, and they kept doing the work God called them to, no matter whose other voices spoke to them in negative ways. And I think as Baptist women now continue to grow in some sense of position and power, they have to be very mindful of bringing others with them, other women with them. And I think women are doing that. Before I became president of Central, I was executive director of Baptist Women in Ministry, and that was my job, to make sure that women's voices were heard and to be an advocate. And we begin to see the numbers of women pastoring churches in Baptist circles increase. It's been slow but steady. And as women become pastors, they begin to include other women in their work as well. So as we together, men and women, reach out to others and bring them along with us as we move forward, I think that's the only way. Courage, resilience, and working together.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please give our illustrious panel a round of applause. I would love to continue the conversation, but I am going to cede my time so that we can hear from the wonderful Bill Leonard. Please join us.
Well, as James Dunn would say, well, hell. You all would have had to have known him. I'm not sure where to start. I went back through the Festschrift, for which I'm exceedingly grateful, and love the topic and love each of the articles. But then you all have made me think of so many things, and so I have to start with this story. Keith Harper, who is the late editor of this volume, Keith and I became acquainted probably 10 or more years ago, and it happened like this. I was still dean, and my office was back here behind this area over on this side of the building. Anyway, my phone rang, and it was this man introduced himself, Keith Harper. He teaches at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And he said, I wanted to call you because I'm using your text, Baptist Ways, in my required Baptist Studies course at Southeastern, and I want to know if Wake Forest University has a witness protection program. We were friends from that moment on. And he and Doug and Ed Crowder, too at times, his late colleague in publishing, he and Doug and I kept a running email about Baptist studies and Baptist weirdness and Baptist dysfunction and Baptist spirituality. I miss him a lot. And I'm so sorry he's not here because we found a way not to deal with the theology, but to deal with the history and the religious experience. And so I'm indebted to him for that. I also want to mention Dr. Weaver in his article mentions the Shantung revival, which I first heard about when I was about 15 or 16 at the B.H. Carroll Memorial Baptist Church on McCart Street in Fort Worth, where our family was members. And Miss Bertha Smith, a missionary
Yeah.
pugilist,
Yeah.
came for revivals, and she talked about, she had been a missionary to China, and she talked about the Shantung revival, and in my adolescence I learned about it. And I also remember Miss Bertha was a formidable religious, experiential religionist, and I'm 15 or 16. And one of the deacons tells me that Miss Bertha is so in touch with the Holy Ghost that she can shake, when she stands at the back of the church, she'll shake hands with you, look you in the eyes, and can tell if you're really born again. Now, I was adolescent, 15 or 16, full of evangelical zeal and adolescent testosterone, both of which can kill you. And so when Miss Bertha came to preach at our church and she was standing at the back shaking hands, I went out the other door. That's what you made me think about. Linda and I both went to Camp Zion in Myrtle, Mississippi, which tried to destroy our adolescence as best they could. That's another whole saga and story. But it's what introduced me to conversion in America, and that Getting Saved in America article begins with when, if you weren't saved at Camp Zion when you got there, and probably if you already were, you got saved again. So that's what I learned. Corey, your research amazed me because it's so thorough always in what you do. The depth of your research always amazes me. But I want to do just a little academic trivia here with you and say you reference Josiah Royce, whom I dearly love, and with whom and in whose work I utilized in my dissertation at BU. And I had not really connected head or heart until your article. And it's taken me back, and I'm going to have to go back and revisit Royce. And I know that's kind of trivia, but I just was delighted to see his name and think about his thinking. So thank you. Pam, your article on Baptist women is a book unto itself, wonderfully, in the best sense, highlighting so many women across Baptist history. And again, someone else, Prathia Hall Wren, I happened to meet when we were members at the great 6th Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham, when she came to preach. And she came several times, and she's one of the best preachers, Melba, one of the best preachers I ever heard. And I rededicated my life every time Prathia preached because she was just astounding. And she left us too soon. Linda McKinnish Bridges' chapter on her father, Brother Harold McKinnish, is a highlight for me because I knew him and loved him. He once named a goat after me, for which I will always appreciate. And her mother, when we got acquainted as family, her mother read some things I wrote, and she asked Linda, are you sure Brother Billy's had a personal experience with Jesus Christ?
She prayed for you daily.
She prayed for me daily. So I'm standing here in the debt of her grace. And her father came. We carried this course up to 3 counties in western North Carolina, and students from a variety of schools would come, and they would meet practitioners in the region. It was called Fierce Landscapes, looking at the churches of Appalachia. And the years that Brother Harold came, he just wowed the students who had never met anyone like this. I always remember, of course, being in that region, we always talked about the serpent handlers. And I'll put a parenthesis here and say, at 2 of the 3 schools where I have had legitimate jobs, I invited serpent handlers to lecture. One in the fine arts, his name just walked out of my head. I'll get it in a minute. One well-known, I called him the Billy Graham of serpent handlers. He was so famous, Carl Porter. And he lectured in the Fine Arts Building. He brought a box full of 5 serpents with him. But he said he couldn't open them because it's a felony in North Carolina. I found out later he was staying at the Marriott over here, and he got the Holy Ghost, poured all 5 on the bed, and had a serpent handling right there. So if you ever stay at the Marriott, ask about the room. But I always remember Porter said, asked for questions, and some young men from Campus Crusade had come to hear him. One held up his hand and said, you know, you talk about the gifts of the Spirit being serpent handling, but in Galatians, Paul lays out the works of the Spirit and doesn't mention serpent handling. And without missing a beat, Carl Porter said yes. But in Mark 16, it talks about it, and Jesus is the one who's doing the talking. That's one of the greatest phrases, and I have since used that on people. You know, go and feed the hungry, and Jesus is the one who's doing the talking. You Republicans. But anyway, back to that story. The serpent handlers, I have said in articles and others, serpent handlers are not crazy. They're very, very weird, but they're not crazy. And those guys from Campus Crusade wanted Carl Porter out inerrantists, the guys from Campus Crusade. If you're going to say the Bible is infallible and inerrant, and you're going to use that on women and on slavery, then you got to get to serpent handling somehow. So just to thank you all for doing this today, and thank you all. I think what I've learned from the Baptists over the years is the Baptists really were the first one in the post-Reformation era. The Moravians got there a little earlier, but to talk about what we sometimes call soul freedom, soul liberty, and to speak about the separation, not simply the separation of church and state, but the whole issue of religious freedom. And the reason they said that was that they believed very strongly that grace was free and individuals had the right to choose it or not. And the freedom of conversion was at the heart of their understanding. And folks like Roger Williams, who's been my great teacher in this, reminds us, and you never thought that 400 years later we'd still be having to quote Roger Williams on this. There are no Christian nations, only Christian people, bound to Christ not by citizenship, but by faith. And so dissent is at the heart of religious experience, because there are always people who want to control that religious experience and place Christianity under their control. And Williams wrote that wonderful volume called The Key to the Language of America, which was the first Native American primer in this country. It was of the Narragansett language. And he wrote a lot of it in verse, and this is my favorite one, and it stays in my head and my heart. When Indians see the cruel ways of English Irish men, their rigid oath, their murders great, Then say these Indians then, we wear no clothes, have many gods, and yet our sins are less. You are barbarians, pagans wild, your land's the wilderness. Lord, I say that verse at least once a week, right now. And I'm hurt and angered and blessed that William said that, and we can still believe it and quote it. Molly Marshall isn't here. Her last chapter talks about humor. When Molly was installed, Pam, as president of Central Seminary, she had me come over and speak. And so when I started, I said, Molly Marshall is so famous in progressive Baptist life that she really only has, she's like Cher, she only has one name. And when you say Molly, everybody knows who you're talking about. So in this article she wrote, she got me back a little bit for saying that. And the next day, the trustees took her academic robe in their first trustee meeting with her and put a picture of Cher up at the top and put it in the president's chair. So it was huge fun. The other thing, one other thing, Randy Ballmer, who's become a great friend and I think is the best American historian living these days, I loved in his article, he talked about James Dunn's friendship with Mark Hatfield. And he had this great line. Mark Hatfield said, James taught me in, this is the quote, vivid terms about my Baptist tradition and heritage as he engaged in battles for religious liberty and separation of church and state. I can't think of a more descriptive phrase than James saying vivid terms. When we started the divinity school, we used to take students up to the YWCA camp at Asheville to get them started. Jill Crenshaw was with us in that. And the very first one, we were sitting by this wonderful mountain creek, and James led the opening prayer, and he prayed, "Oh Lord, we're not sure what we're damn gonna do, but you have to help us do it." And the students told me after, that's the first time we ever heard a Baptist preacher cuss in prayer. All of that's to say that this has been a great adventure. And I am ever in debt to so many people who shaped my understanding of what Baptists are. People living and dead, like Williams, like now Prathia Hall. And one of the great religious experiences of my life has been in black churches. When we left the Southern Baptist Seminary, which, by the way, the controversy in the SBC in the 80s and 90s anticipated the country as we know it now. There was an effort intentionally to build a base that became evangelicals, and Southern Baptists were the leading segment of voters among those evangelicals that brought about what we're into right now. And when we all had to leave the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, where I was teaching then, because of that. And now Harvard and Columbia and assorted universities are having that same kind of effort at authoritarian changes in curriculum and identity. Very much a similar playbook. So when we came, we went, I said, you all know Emily Hull McGee, her grandfather sent the helicopter to the roof of the embassy to get us out of Louisville. And our family, you have to be a certain age to know that, you wrote that. And so we went to Samford University, and Candace, my spouse, had done a doctorate in Spanish drama and literature, and we both had teaching jobs. But we'd been in what I call the Baptist Wars, and we were just so tired of it, and we just didn't know we could even go back to a progressive moderate church. And John Thomas Porter was pastor for 30 years of the 6th Avenue Baptist in Birmingham, and he invited me to come and speak at a fall Sunday school Wednesday night kickoff for them. And then we started visiting the church. And by January of that year, we were out in the parking lot, and this African-American woman of some age came up to me as we were getting in the car, and she said, "Reverend, you've been visiting our church for some weeks now." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Don't you think it's time you walked?" You all know what that means? Walk in the aisle. And that was the Holy Ghost. So the next Sunday we walked. And we joined, and Dr. Porter introduced us, and he said, "We're glad to have Dr. Leonard and Mrs. Leonard," and Candace had just received her doctorate. And she turned to him immediately and said, "Dr. Leonard." And the women of the church broke out into spontaneous applause. It was a wonderful, wonderful welcome. And we learned so much in that congregation, and we knew we were pretty much home when our daughter Stephanie, who's a person with special needs, one Sunday, she was sitting between us, and she leaned over to her mom and me. She said, "Dad, time to raise our hands, time to raise our hands." So we were settled in, and now we've been here since 96, and in 97 we joined First Baptist Highland Avenue, where we still are. And one of our pastors, Reverend Dr. Darrell Aaron, who's taught here in the Divinity School, is with us today, and who's one of the most amazing pastors I've ever known. And he was the one, I'll finish with this, in 2007, who suggested we have a Good Friday service at our church on the 7 last words of Jesus, and asked Divinity School students to be the preachers. And with the exception of 2 COVID years, we've had that service every year, and it's become something of a community event as people come not just from the Divinity School and our church, but from a variety of congregations. And it's one that I hope will continue till Jesus comes back. And I hope he'll wait till after that service if he comes on Good Friday. The gift that you all have given is wonderful to all of us today to talk about these issues and remember dear people who've touched us and loved us and tolerated us and blessed us. The peace of God be with us all.